Hi everyone, my name is Charlie. I'm a computer programmer. I've been programming for 13 years and I should be working right now programming. It's 3 in the morning and I've just been reading about the Java and Oracle case the Google and Oracle case that's still going on from years ago. More specifically, I read this thing from a year ago by the Solicitor General of America about how the Supreme Court should not look into it because the the Java Standard Library, and particularly the declarations in it, are protected by copyright. I just made like one video. It was like 50 minutes long, and I was slicing it up, and I was like, "Fuck this! It's too long. I'm just gonna try again. It's gonna be really brief. I'm not gonna just like read and skim and then say, oh yeah, so these are my thoughts and his words, and let me read like just pages to you of what he's saying." But basically, it boils down to I guess is that we're dealing with languages here, which copyright law, uh, I'm assuming, was designed to express ideas or protect I guess, the expression of ideas. Um, and I don't think when they came up with copyright law, and even maybe to right now, no one's really thinking of the fact that we're dealing with languages, which people, maybe you just think of, oh, you just give the computer some instructions, and here's the thing is though that you could program without a computer. You just use your noggin. Usually when I program, it revolves around walking in a circle, and then I write on a sheet of paper, and then I gather my papers, and I sit at the computer, and then I code it or something, and then maybe I run into a problem, and then I'm like, oh, back to the drawing board. But the thing is, um, language is how you express ideas. It's like a framework for expression of ideas. And it seems that the Solicitor General, who he seems like he knows what's going on with computers. I don't think he programmed before this case or anything, but I think he like did his duty and like isn't just ignorant. He knows like something about computers now. But I think maybe he doesn't quite have the grasp of the whole like field of computer science to understand what's going on. And so he sort of says in this in his thing from May of last year that computer programs are protected by copyright, and the Java Standard Library is also protected by copyright. And that's good. I think our library should be protected by copyright, but the problem is he treats a computer program sort of like you would a book written in a language, right? Like English or Spanish or French or something. And he keeps kind of saying like, "Oh, there's a computer program and it does something." And since it's so flexible, like the fact that they copied something from them, like they could have come up with something else, but they didn't. The thing is though that we're dealing with languages here, so there's just people around the world. Like it's not just a business. Like it's people literally think of stuff in this. They write in it. They never thought, oh, now I need to, if I wanted to re-implement like the standard library, because if you want to like you have to use a license agreement for that. And it's always kind of been assumed that like, hey, if you're not happy with like the licensing agreement, then you could go and re-implement it yourself without having to break your already existing code. But it seems as if the Solicitor General is mostly focused on attracting new developers to the Android platform when it came out, uh, sort of as like a, hey, come look, you already know how to program Android because it's Java. Sort of as like like it's easy like to attract developers, but it wasn't just like a business move. It's actually a language that people use, and it's not. And the idea of making a language or the language definition isn't restricted to the big companies or the organizations that make languages. Which at the very end of this, he says that. The character of the copyrighted work at issue makes this case a poor vehicle for the court to address for the first time the application of copyright principles to computer programs. Unlike many of the cases that have been the subject of reported appellate, probably means like appeal or something, decisions, this case does not involve the copying of code for an ordinary computer program. Rather, petitioner copied portions of a collection of pre-written Java methods distributed as part of a platform of programming tools designed to assist programmers in writing other computer programs. As a result, the parties and the courts below have devoted considerable attention to questions such as the distinction between declaring code and implementing code, the technical significance of various features of the Java standard library, and the degree to which Java programmers possess familiarity with respondents' pre-written methods that may have little significance in more common disputes. The court's resolution of this case, therefore, might not cast meaningful light on the proper resolution of more typical copyright infringement cases involving computer programs. I disagree with that statement because we're dealing with the standard library here, right? And what it's doing is they're saying that because Oracle owns Java and like the base language, their library is elevated above everyone else's libraries. But as anyone who programs the considerable amount like knows, like you define libraries like normal programmers write libraries too, right? Like I write libraries to do stuff. If you program, you probably have written a library before, and a library is sort of like a synonym for an API. It's not just something that someone does. It's not like saying, oh, the Java standard library is Java or something. It's just another library. And the thing is, though, that these libraries, they extend and modify a language so that you later can use them as like part of the language. But it's not because that Oracle owns Java that they can add to a language. Rather, any programmer can modify and extend Java, sort of like, I guess you could modify like the compiler and stuff or the runtime, but you're not going to do that. But like, I just mean like you could define a class or an object or a function or something that you can later call. And in that sense, you say, hey, programmers, now when you say this, it does this. And now when you work, like basically like type this out, this happens. And it becomes part of the language. It becomes part of like, when you think, it becomes part of the grammar sort of. You can't really change, I guess, like syntax that much unless you're like working with Scala, which does. But you can, it still sort of feels like part of the language. Like, hey, by including this library, I've added a significant amount of functionality that I can then build upon. So the problem is that by saying that Google violated copyright because they use the same kind of organization and declaration, and that's something that Oracle owns, and then calling that part of the computer program, they're missing the point, right? It's sort of like computer programmers or computer programs are both sort of, you have to define the language you want to speak in, and then you also have to implement whatever you want it to do, the procedure or whatever. And just one example of something that I want to pick out, which, let me see, scrutiny. How do you spell that? Scrutiny. I'm going to cut this out. Okay. He goes to write, petitioner does not contend that all computer code constitutes a method of operation or system. Rather, petitioner argues that the declaring code at issue here has a special quality that distinguishes it from computer code in general. According to petitioner, because the declaring code dictates the commands that Java programmers must use to invoke pre-written methods, the declaring code is the method of operating those methods, whereas the implementing code is not. That distinction does not withstand scrutiny. Both declaring code and implementing code ultimately perform the same practical function. They instruct a computer to work. The declaring code tells the computer to call up the implementing code, and the implementing code tells the computer to perform an operation such as executing a sorting algorithm. Both are necessary components of a Java or Android method, and neither declaring code nor the implementing code is what a programmer physically types when invoking a method. There's an inaccuracy here. He says that both declaring code and implementing code ultimately perform the same practical function. They instruct a computer to work. The declaring code tells the computer to call up the implementing code, and the implementing code tells the computer to perform an operation. That's incorrect. The declaring code does not tell the computer to call up the implementing code. The function call, the method call, calls it up, right? He says, neither the declaring code nor the implementing code is what a programmer physically types when invoking a method. That's right, but they make a function call. But up here, he sort of says that the declaring code tells the computer to call up the implementing code, and it doesn't. When you type out, what the programmer actually types out is the name of the method, which would be defined in the declaration. But the declaration does not run. It doesn't even make it into the final compiled executable. It's actually, unless you compile with debugging symbols turned on, it doesn't make it. What happens is it doesn't need it. It's just a reference sort of for the compiler to link it all, like, or the linker. And so when you run a function call, a method call, it will store the registers in like a stack or something, and then it will have a go-to instruction, a low-level like processor or virtual machine instruction that will jump into your binary where the implementation code starts. But the declaration code does not transform into any instructions at all. It's just a label that says, hey, this is what we call this block of code, that then programmers use like talking. It's like part of the language now because it's declared as it. And I think that really is probably like the big misunderstanding. It's been a year ago. I wonder if someone corrected him. Maybe not, though. Like, I don't know. Like, honestly, I missed it a few times too. But that's a misconception that is in this that I don't know if it's been corrected. But it's just that, yeah, the declaration is special. It doesn't turn into anything that runs. It's actually sort of like a extension of the language that the whole thing about interoperability and familiarity of programs, I think he says that because Android sort of breaks compatibility with Java, it doesn't really interoperate well. So the argument that they wanted to that this can't that Oracle has no claim because they need to interoperate is false. It's not so much a computer thing that needs to interoperate. It's that it's a language thing, you know? It's like, this is how people talk. This is their language, right? It's sort of like saying, like Oracle saying they own the language, which I guess they do, but it's like, can you own a language? You can obviously own something written in a language, but can you own a language as in a way to express ideas? And it's sort of like I don't know, yeah, I guess that's the crux of it, is that everyone's talking about computer programs like the standard library is building blocks for computer programmers, like they're little mini programs, and I understand that they're explained that way, but really what it is that it's part of the language, and it's not even restricted to just Sun, like as I mentioned. All Java programmers write abstractions and stuff, so they're constantly coming up with different dialects and languages and stuff, and I think that that's something that when the Eric Schmidt or whatever tried to talk about hamburgers or whatever, and he's like, oh, yes, you know, if two restaurants call something a hamburger, they could have competing implementations of a hamburger, but they're still going to use the word hamburger, and that's what it boils down to, is that you're saying that copyright applies to computer programs, but computer programs both define a language and then write in that language, and it's not up to Oracle or Sun or any organization or company to define a language. It's something that's done by everyone who writes in a language. They add to it, they extend it, they modify it as needed. And excuse me. So when Google copied those declarations, it's sort of like going into the merger thing. Which is that you're allowed to sort of like things can't apply to copyright if there's only one way to do it. And because there's many ways to skin a cat, of course, like when they were up on the pedestal or whatever and had to, like, under oath say, like, oh, yes, there's an unlimited amount of ways we could have done this. They were like, oh, well, then why didn't you do it a different way? And the reason is not a business thing, not like, oh, we want to be familiar to Java programmers. Like it's sort of like, it's not just a familiarity thing. It's like, if you look at in this example, he says public static int max. He's showing like a maximum function. I guess I could show you it on the screen. If I could flip the camera, maybe I can't. Whoop. Yeah, I don't know if that was helpful. I'll probably crop that out. But could Google have left out public? Could they have made it private? No. It would have meant something different. Could they have kept static off? No. You'd have to instantiate the object to use it. What about int? It's going to return an int. Max, they could have changed, but that's what, at least that they say they could have changed it. But the thing is that's people's language, right? Like, language doesn't belong to the person who made it. It belongs to everyone who uses it. If no one uses it, it's a dead language. And it's sort of like there needs to be a protection of language, because otherwise, like Oracle could say, well, we're changing the language now. Everyone has to deal with it. Also, you're not allowed to make another implementation of the language. You need to adapt your code or deal with it. And if that wasn't true, then someone could just say, fuck that, I'm going to re-implement Java and I'm going to fork it and do it my own way because I don't like your guidance of the language. But what this person's saying is that, hey, if you want to speak in Java, you're under the rule of Oracle's kind of direction. And if you don't like their direction, well, you're SOL, because they own the copyright on the code. And the thing about libraries is that it becomes part of the language. It modifies, it extends, it changes the language, and it's very coupled, right? And I guess that's basically it. Is that he keeps saying how like there's computer programs written in a language, but he doesn't realize that part of a computer program is defining the language that you want to speak in, sort of, and that every programmer, not just big companies that make languages, have facilities to do that, because Oracle is using the same tools, Java, to make the Java standard library as any Java developer who has made their own library would use. So that's basically it. It's, I guess, another way of looking at it is with a counterexample, is that if this was protected by copyright, then Oracle would sort of own the way that you can express your thoughts, right? Copyright is supposed to protect the expression of ideas, but what happens when the idea is the framework with which you express other ideas? Do they instantly own the idea that you express within their framework because it's built upon their ideas? I guess maybe. I don't know. It's up to them now. But, like, that's a little scary if you think about it, right? They're going to start being like, well, you can't think like that unless we say it's okay. You can't talk like that unless we say it's okay. That's all I'm trying to say, is I don't see people talking like that. I see them saying, oh, it was a technical reason, it had to interoperate. Oh, it was going to be like nice and familiar to Java programmers. What it boils down to is that in computers, it's not just a computer program, like an algorithm, like something it does. A large portion of programming computers is defining the language and the framework that you think in, and if that's, and I guess maybe there should be a way to protect that, but I don't know. It's sort of like, I guess I don't have a good solution. I guess I would really think that, like, Google did everything okay because they did re-implement it, and the declaring code doesn't make it into any final binary. It's simply a way to declare an extension to the language. That's all, yeah. I think maybe he was confused, thinking that the Java standard library was somehow on a pedestal and that it was above other Java developers' libraries that weren't, like, internally developed. But what if I made a Java library and then someone else made another Java library with the completely same interface, could I then, if this passes, could I then sue them and say, hey, you stole my API. You're not allowed to talk like that. You're not allowed to think like that. I beat you to it. Motherfucker, suck my dick. Anyway, I don't know. That's my 2 cents. This is a lot shorter than the last one, so I'm going to stop here. I don't know if that helped or anything, but thanks for watching.